So what we're essentially going to do is give an overview of what we've heard from those in the AuthorAID community, which is why we're talking about the challenges of communicating research. Now, it sounds like a lot of people have heard about AuthorAID, so we're going to go through it really quickly. We're not going to provide a lot of detail of what we actually do, but if you do want to know more, then please feel free to come over and talk to me or Andy. So I am Jennifer Chapin. I'm the program manager for AuthorAID at INASP, and I work very closely with Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Nobes. I'm Program Officer for the AuthorAID project at INASP, and I'm concerned mainly with the AuthorAID website, through which we do online mentoring and our online courses.
So we're going to do a bit of a double act. It'll be me and then Andy will go. So this is the AuthorAID network. So we call ourselves a global network supporting researchers in lower and middle income countries. These photos are photos that have been sent to us of our researchers taking our online courses. This is a snapshot of the sort of a split of our researchers across the world. And actually it does say 14,000, but we're now up to 17,000, so it's gone up quite quickly in the last 6 months. And you can see we're generally based quite largely sub-Saharan Africa, sort of South Asia. And I'll just quickly say that AuthorAID, you know, for anyone who doesn't know, we've got the online platform, the AuthorAID platform, which Andy mentioned. So we offer online courses in communicating research, how to communicate research, how to publish. We offer an online mentoring program that connects low-income researchers or academics and researchers from low-income institutions with more senior and experienced researchers from around the world. We also offer quite a lot of resources. We have a very active discussion group of about 2,000 people. And then we also have another strand of AuthorAID work, which is working more directly with institutions on very long-term capacity development, where we build their capacity to improve the research skills across the institution. And so today we're going to go over some of the things that people have told us, and these generally come from the discussion group, like I mentioned, which now numbers 2,000 people. We just completed an impact study, which hasn't even been published yet, but these are some of the preliminary findings. We surveyed a big cohort of the AuthorAID community, and we had 1,126 responses. We've also done a survey of the AuthorAID membership on open access, and we do generally routine surveys of people who've taken our online courses and who participate in our mentoring program. Okay, so this is the first question. We asked this on the discussion group last year. So we asked, what is your biggest challenge in publishing your research? And we heard the top 3, generally pretty even, were a lack of research funding, writing in the English language, and identifying the most suitable, genuine journals. The next few were, delays with peer review, sort of frustrations with the peer review process and the length of time, getting papers accepted through the peer review process, publication costs. Obviously, we're hearing a lot about article processing charges. A lack of mentors or a lack of people to check and review manuscripts locally within the institution, and having the knowledge to write in a particular academic style that's needed for that publication. So I mentioned the AuthorAID impact study, and like I said, we'll be releasing the sort of more broader findings of this later this year. What we wanted to do is compare the capacity development, our capacity development approaches between our online courses, people who had completed an online course, people who had completed a mentoring relationship, and people who had completed one of our more rare intensive courses that was a smaller group of people. And one of the questions we asked, I should mention that, like I said, 1,126 survey responses, and that was from 91 different countries. So one of the questions that we asked was, what are the barriers to publication success? And one of the top ones was bias in journals. And I think this is a perceived bias. I don't think we believe that there's a bias, but this is their perceived bias that journals are asking for things that are more difficult for them to achieve. And then balancing their teaching workload with their research, that's a really, really big one. Also, having access to peers at work or peers online. So in a lot of our partner institutions, we find that actually having local access to local mentoring support is really very difficult, which is why they use the AuthorAID website. And also the language of publication. So sometimes very difficult to be able to write in a particular academic style in English when it's not your first language. And just to say, we've also heard about some of the other issues, which are, the lack of access to funding locally. So that's quite a big one, and we get a lot of people talking or coming to AuthorAID and asking about, access to funding. Okay, the other thing is we asked for what are some of the determinants of publication success? And by determinants, we meant, what was integral to being able to publish. And understanding the publication process was one of the really big ones. We do spend a lot of time in our AuthorAID online course actually going through the process of publishing and trying to explain that, because it's very foreign sometimes when you're just starting out in your early career. Also confidence, and that's another big one that we found. Confidence as a result of knowledge about the process and what leads to publication success. So again, confidence is a really difficult thing to survey, to qualify, but what we can see is that confidence grows once the knowledge about the process grows. Also the ability to network and receive support from others, which I mentioned, and a better understanding of issues like plagiarism and predatory journals, which Andy will talk about a bit more. And just quickly, we also asked about facilitators of publication success, so sort of secondary factors. And the things that we heard were about, data analysis skills, which we're hearing more and more people are looking for, being able to build their skills in data analysis, writing skills, which is what we try and do with the online course, and the language of publication again, so being able to write in the language, which is more often than not English. And just lastly, what we've seen come through a lot of the surveys we've sent out, or conversations we've had with people, is that women do face even more challenges. And we noticed this when we first started running our research writing workshops in some local institutions, some of our partner institutions, and that maybe 8 out of every 10 people were men. So very, very low percentage were women. We noticed that. We also noticed that maybe 4 out of every 5 grants we were giving out was going to a man. So we started to think about what the issues were that were affecting this. So we heard that, some of the things we've heard is that women do have to balance family roles and expectations. And when we talk to some of our female researchers, they say, that's because, I'm busy all the time when I'm not at the university. And on the weekends, I don't have time to write a paper. I don't have time to do an experiment because I'm taking care of my family. And a lot of the institutions don't have policies and processes that might address these types of issues. They also sometimes face obstacles in completing field research that men might not. One example we had when we went to Tanzania last year was a fisheries researcher, a woman who said that she couldn't actually go out on a boat to collect samples because the local fishermen believed that if a woman stepped foot in their boat, it was bad luck. So these are the types of things that we hear. And then we also hear about the leaky pipeline. So that's, very similar actually in the UK and other places where women tend to drop out sort of halfway through the process. So they don't rise to the top of the institution. And one of the questions we asked in the impact study was, how would it be different if you were a man or if you were a woman? And we did hear that, if I were a man, I would have been better off in terms of profession, yes, because men have that liberty, they can travel. And one man said, if I were a female, I would not get such a position because a female has more struggles. It is comparatively easy for a male than a female in Nepal. I'll hand that over to Andy.
Okay, so I'm going to report back on a few more experiences from the researchers that we've been working with from the actual online community that we communicate with regularly. Firstly, this is another picture that was sent in one of our recent online courses. This is a researcher in Ethiopia, and she was quite creative with the picture she sent and broke it into 4 pieces and showed, first of all, the research subject, the local context, the research that she did in her lab, and then the actual output, which in this case was a conference presentation. So I think this is a really good picture. The trouble is, with this whole research cycle, there are often roadblocks that appear at various stages, for example, in the collecting the data, analysing the data, and then actually publishing or a research output at the end. That's what we hear about quite a lot. So looking at some other interesting information we've received in recent surveys and discussions. So this is quite an interesting question we asked in an open access survey, which asks, do you have the access to all the academic literature you need to carry out your research? And as you can see, around about over 40% say they definitely don't have access. And there's lots of analysis we could do into this further research, because the group of researchers that we're working with encompasses countries like Sudan, Somalia, but also Nigeria and India, South Africa, who don't, for example, have access to some of the Hinari content. So there's a very mixed picture here, but it gives you an idea that we still have some way to go for developing country researchers to have access to the research that they need. We also did this straw poll on our discussion group as a follow-up to the question that Jen mentioned, and it asked what's your main training need as a researcher? And we're quite surprised by the results. We're expecting it all to be around writing in English, academic writing, getting published. But in fact, the top result by far was that they need training in data analysis and statistics, which we weren't expecting, and just shows that there are more fundamental skills that are often needed instead of just writing up their research. So this is another picture of a researcher on our recent course. This is him doing the online course in his laboratory, which is interesting. I can't remember his name, but he's in India. And if you weren't aware, we've recently been, we're recently a finalist of the ALPS Innovation Awards, which is great. This is for the research writing online courses. This is another picture from a researcher both in the lab and doing the online course at home, which shows the context that she's working in. This is like Caroline from Kenya. So this gives the opportunity to talk about some of the most common concerns that are brought up on the discussion groups in the online courses that we run for researchers. This is mostly in the research writing and grant proposal writing courses. So things such as actual confidence in writing, as Jen mentioned, and this can be particularly the case with women researchers. Finding the right journal, identifying what credible journals are, and identifying what the right journal, the right target journal would be for them, for their research. Dealing with the peer review process encompasses actually understanding the process and also dealing with rejection from peer reviewers. And what happens if there's a delay, if the editor doesn't get back to you for a year. And there are lots of issues around plagiarism, things like what does self-plagiarism mean? What happens if I commit plagiarism, but also lots of things around basic citation practices and the difference between plagiarism and paraphrasing, for example. There are lots and lots of questions around this, and also things like following instructions, which can have a knock-on effect. If, for example, you're submitting an article to a journal, it can be quite a scary process. It can be quite a confusing process for an early career researcher whose first language is not English. This is Joshua Okonya, who was actually present at the last PFD conference and gave a presentation. He's a researcher from Uganda, and he joined the AuthorAID website in 2013 as a mentee to get more resources for and to get some help writing his research. And as a result, he's published many papers since with help from his mentor and with help from the resources on our website. And he's now actually become an AuthorAID mentor on the website, so he's actually helping other researchers who were once looking for assistance. And as Jen has mentioned, we've got over 17,000 researchers on our website now, many of which are looking for mentoring. We've got mentors and mentees from all over the world, and this is a breakdown, if you can see it, of the different types of support that researchers are looking for. And it can cover the whole research process. It can go from things like career mentoring, publication ethics, and the most important things at the top, how to actually plan to write an article. Again, dealing with the publishing process, and lots of things around language and editing and proofreading. This is another researcher from our recent course. This is Mayhad in Somalia interviewing a woman entrepreneur in Hargeisa. He had lots of questions on our online course around where to actually publish his research. He was having problems telling between a credible researcher and predatory journals. He wasn't really sure how to tell this. So a few things around what we've experienced from researchers. There's a lot of problems around an awareness of what the right journals are in their field. What are the international journals? What are the journals in their country? And the differences between subscription and open access journals. And there's a lot of confusion over the business models. When do I need to pay to submit my article? So lots of people aren't aware that they can publish for free, that they don't actually have to pay a fee for a subscription journal. And there's not a lot of awareness around APC waivers at all. So there's lots of misinformation that an early career researcher might typically find around should they be publishing in a journal with an impact factor? Should it be an international journal? Would I have to pay for it? How much should they pay? And this is a very ripe ground for being deceived by predatory publishers. And I'll mention that in a moment, but I thought I'd throw in some interesting information from the open access survey we did last year. And I'm sorry at the back. Basically, the first pie chart shows that of those researchers on our community who have published in an open access journal, around 70% have actually paid a fee to publish. And then we asked a follow-up question, how did you pay that APC? And this is very interesting in terms of what Vasanti said earlier. Over 60% paid it themselves. And there are lots of questions that could come up as a follow-up question to this. We didn't actually ask how much the fee was. And I suspect in a lot of cases for a journal in their own country, the fee will be much lower than, say, for example, £3,000 for a European journal. So there's some interesting information there. This is very quickly Ishmael. He is one of our AuthorAID mentors in Tanzania. And he's been talking to us, he's been mentioning to us recently that he's been having to communicate with early career researchers, the junior researchers he mentors, about the correct journal to publish in. So he talks a lot about predatory journals. And this is quite a huge problem with the researchers that communicate with us. Even the mentors that apply to be a mentor on our website often have some quite strange journals in their CV that we have to go back to them and suggest alternatives. So this is a quote from Ishmael, who says that in lots of cases with researchers, it's an easy way of getting promoted if they publish in a so-called predatory journal. And quite often, junior researchers will fall for this and will be unaware of what the situation is. And he really suggests that people should ask their mentors, ask their peers, and check with them. And we've also got some interesting quotes from the WhatsApp group that we have for researchers who finish our online courses. For example, one person mentioned that as a researcher in their country, they're pretty much expected to find their own feet. They're not really guided on publishing processes, and it's a real struggle to survive. This is another researcher we work in Tanzania. This is Professor Floria Fabian. She recommends using the Think, Check, Submit scheme that INASP is a part of. If you're not aware of how this works, go to thinkchecksubmit.org. It's a checklist on how to find credible journals. A couple more quotes that we've had from the researchers that I've spoken to. There's a lack of institutional guidance on how to tell what is a good journal and how to get published in a reputable journal. A lot of people aren't aware of the problem. Even senior researchers are publishing in predatory journals. One researcher admits that they actually published in a predatory journal themselves. They're feeling kind of guilty about it. They didn't really realize what the problem was. But for the moment, it still counts towards their promotion. So they're probably not going to mention that to their institution. So it's a real issue that we find for developing country researchers, particularly junior researchers.
Yeah, just finally, trying to sum up sort of what we've covered. We know that there are things that we can do to better support researchers, and we've started to do some of these. Obviously, we're trying to address them within the AuthorAID platform, within our online course. But we also are thinking about how we can do some of these things better in the future. We're thinking about ways that we can. So we know that more support in how to find and target journals and what access is available, really important. People also need clearer guidance on business models, APCs, waivers, the peer review process. So anything that can make that more clear is really would be really beneficial. And also more advice on how researchers can distinguish between credible and predatory journals. We do spend a lot of time when we're running a workshop in, say, Tanzania or Sri Lanka, talking about predatory journals. And it's amazing how often you need to talk about it. Some of our, one of our institutions that we work with in Ghana has said they have to do sort of awareness sessions about predatory journals over and over and over again, because people just, it's not sinking in and they still don't quite know how to distinguish between them and credible journals. Also guidance on academic writing for publication, so more clear guidelines on how to write in a particular academic tone in English style. And also more technical training and support for data, statistics, citation, and plagiarism. So it's quite a lot of things. We're going to try and do what we can on the AuthorAID website, but it would be really good if the people in this room thought about what they could do as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That's great.